You think you're choosing your reality with your conscious intentions. You set the goal, you visualize the outcome, you affirm what you want. But there's a selection process happening in the subconscious layer that determines which realities you're even allowed to see. You're not failing to create your intended reality. You're being filtered out of the observation space where that reality exists. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, think about something you've been trying to create or manifest or achieve. Something you can visualize clearly, something that makes logical sense for you to have. Got it? Good. Now notice something. You can picture it. You can imagine yourself living that reality. But there's something off about it, isn't there? It's like watching a movie of someone else's life. You can see the scenes, but you can't feel yourself in them. Not really. That disconnection isn't happening because you don't want it enough. It's not happening because you have limiting beliefs about whether it's possible. It's happening because your subconscious is running a filter that determines which versions of reality your consciousness can collapse into observable states. And the reality you're trying to access exists outside the bandwidth that filter allows. Here's how this actually works at the quantum level. The quantum field contains infinite possibility configurations. Every version of every reality exists simultaneously in superposition. When you observe, you collapse one specific configuration into your experience. That's basic quantum mechanics. But here's what most people miss. Your subconscious determines which regions of that field you're capable of observing in the first place. Think of it like a radio. The field is broadcasting every frequency simultaneously. Your consciousness is the receiver, but your subconscious controls which frequencies your receiver can actually tune into. You can want to listen to a station all day long, but if your receiver isn't capable of accessing that frequency band, you're never going to hear it. You'll just keep getting whatever frequencies you're already tuned to. When you set an intention for a new reality, you're essentially saying, I want to observe this frequency. But if that frequency exists outside your current observation bandwidth, your intention never reaches the field as a coherent collapse instruction. Your conscious mind says, I want X, but your subconscious filter only permits observation of reality configurations that match its established frequency signature. The waveform collapses, but not to your intended coordinates. It collapses to the nearest reality state that your filter allows. This is why you can do everything right, the visualizations, the affirmations, the techniques, and still end up with the same baseline reality. You're not doing anything wrong. You're being filtered before you even get to the choosing part. Let me give you some markers so you can recognize this in your own experience. You can clearly visualize your desired reality. But when you do, there's no felt sense of meanness in that scenario. It's like you're watching a character who looks like you, but it doesn't feel like you inhabiting that life. That's not a failure of imagination. That's your subconscious filter telling you that reality configuration doesn't match what it recognizes as self. Or maybe you notice that your affirmations or visualizations create a sense of effort, like you're reaching for something through a glass wall. You can see it, but you can't touch it. There's always this subtle barrier between you and the reality you're trying to access. That barrier is the filter. Here's another one. The reality you want makes perfect logical sense. You can explain why you should have it, why you deserve it, why it's reasonable. But when you imagine actually living it, there's this quiet voice that says, that's not for people like me. Not even as a belief you're aware of, just as a subtle quality in how the imagined reality feels. That's the filter operating below conscious awareness. You might also notice that you get really excited when you first learn a new manifestation technique or reality creation concept. For a few days, you're energized. You practice. You feel hopeful. Then within a week, maybe two, you're back to the same baseline feeling state. Same concerns, same internal experience. The technique didn't stop working. You hit the edge of your observation bandwidth and the filter snapped. You back to the frequencies it recognizes. And here's the one that really shows you this is happening. You can easily imagine worst-case scenarios with full emotional texture. You can feel the anxiety, picture the details, experience it in your body. But desired scenarios feel flat. They require concentration to maintain. They don't have that same visceral quality. Why? Because the worst-case scenarios exist within your current observation bandwidth. Your filter permits them. The desired scenarios don't match the frequency signature your subconscious recognizes, so they can't fully come into your felt experience. None of this means you're broken or doing something wrong. Your subconscious isn't sabotaging you. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do: maintain observation coherence within a specific reality bandwidth. The problem isn't your beliefs about what's possible. The problem is that your subconscious identity signature doesn't match the frequency coordinates of the reality you're trying to observe. Think about what this means. You're not being blocked by limiting beliefs you need to clear. You're not failing because you don't believe hard enough or want it enough. You're operating from an observer position that has access to certain reality states and not others. And that observer position is determined by what your subconscious recognizes as self. So if your subconscious is pre-filtering your reality before you even get to choose, what exactly is it filtering for? And more importantly, why does it filter out the exact reality you consciously want? The mechanism is simpler than you think, and it's happening right now as you read this. Your subconscious has one job: recognize self in the field and collapse only those reality states that match. But here's where it gets strange. It's not recognizing the self you think you are. It's recognizing the self you've been observing. Let me break down what's actually happening. The subconscious doesn't operate on a belief system. It operates on a recognition protocol. Every moment, it's scanning the quantum field for familiar frequency patterns, the specific signature of me that's been reinforced through repeated observation. And here's the mechanism most people completely miss. Every time you collapse a reality, every moment you experience, you're feeding data to your subconscious about what being me looks like. Think about it like this. You wake up, you go through your day, you experience a series of moments. Each of those moments is a collapsed reality state, and your subconscious is taking notes, not consciously, not deliberately, but it's building a probability map. These are the types of reality configurations this observer consistently collapses. These are the emotional frequencies, circumstantial patterns, and identity markers that define this observation point. It then uses that map as a filter. It only allows you to observe realities that contain those familiar markers, not because it's trying to keep you safe, not because it's protecting you from disappointment, simply because those are the reality configurations it recognizes as self. This is what we can call observer state entrenchment. Your subconscious has learned through accumulated observation what you looks like in reality. And once that pattern is established, it becomes the filter through which all future observations must pass. Now here's where people get this completely wrong. They think the subconscious evaluates whether a reality is good or bad for you, whether it serves you, whether it's aligned with your goals. It doesn't. It evaluates whether that reality configuration contains the signature of self it has. Learn to recognize if the reality you want contains circumstances your subconscious has never observed as you, it gets filtered out. If it involves emotional states you haven't historically collapsed into, it gets filtered out. If it includes identity markers that don't match the accumulated data of who you've been, filtered out. Not because it's impossible, because it doesn't pass the recognition protocol. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you want financial abundance. You do the visualizations. You affirm it. You try to feel it. But your subconscious has years of data showing that you are someone who experiences financial limitation. That's the pattern it recognizes. That's what being you looks like in the probability map. When you try to intend a reality of abundance, you're essentially asking your subconscious to recognize a stranger as self. The quantum field collapses. It always collapses, but not to your intended coordinates. It collapses to the nearest reality state that matches your existing observer signature. Maybe you get a small windfall, but then an unexpected expense. Maybe opportunities appear, but you self-sabotage. The pattern remains intact because the pattern is what your subconscious recognizes as you. This is why you keep experiencing the same core reality, regardless of what you consciously try to change. Check your own experience right now. Have you noticed that your life circumstances change superficially, but the underlying feeling and pattern remains identical? Different people, same dynamic. Different job, same frustration. Different location, same internal experience. That's not coincidence. That's observer state entrenchment. Your subconscious is collapsing you into reality states that match the recognized pattern of self, regardless of the external details. Or maybe you can intellectually accept that anything is possible. You understand quantum mechanics. You get the concept. But your body has a visceral yeah right response when you imagine specific desired outcomes. That's not doubt. That's the recognition protocol failing. Your subconscious doesn't recognize that reality configuration as you, and your nervous system is giving you the feedback. Here's another marker. When you picture your desired reality, do you unconsciously picture yourself having to become a different person to have it? Like you'd need to be more confident, more disciplined, more worthy? That's the recognition protocol at work. You're sensing that the reality doesn't match the current identity signature, so you assume you need to change yourself to access it. But that's backwards. You need to change what your subconscious recognizes as self. Some of you have successfully changed external circumstances before. You got the new job, the new relationship, the new location, but you felt like an imposter, like you were playing a role rather than being yourself. That's because you collapsed into a reality state that didn't fully match your subconscious recognition pattern. You could maintain it temporarily through effort, but it required constant energy because your subconscious was continuously trying to pull you back to familiar territory. This is the real mechanism behind what people call self-sabotage. It's not that you're afraid of success. It's not that you don't deserve good things. It's that your subconscious is faithfully executing its recognition protocol. And the reality you're trying to maintain doesn't match the signature it recognizes as self. Now here's the insight that changes everything. The work isn't convincing your subconscious that your desired reality is possible. The work is updating the identity signature your subconscious recognizes as self, so that it includes the frequency coordinates of that reality. You're not changing what you believe. You're not clearing limiting beliefs. You're changing what your subconscious recognizes. This is a completely different approach than anything you've been taught. It's not about affirmations that override the old pattern. It's not about accumulating evidence until your subconscious finally believes you. It's about updating the recognition protocol itself. But to do that, we need to understand what your subconscious is actually recognizing. Because it's not your thoughts. It's not even your emotions, not really. It's something more fundamental. Something operating at the field level that you've been completely overlooking. And once you see it, everything about how you've been approaching reality creation will make sense, including why it hasn't been working. Your subconscious isn't reading your thoughts. It's not even tracking your emotions, not primarily. It's detecting your baseline frequency signature, the electromagnetic pattern your nervous system generates based on your identity state. And here's what nobody tells you. This signature is completely invisible to your conscious awareness while simultaneously determining every reality you're capable of. Observing, let me explain what's actually happening. Here, your nervous system is a transceiver. Right now, this moment, it's broadcasting a frequency pattern into the quantum field and receiving back reality configurations that match that frequency. This isn't a metaphor, this isn't spiritual language. Your autonomic nervous system generates measurable electromagnetic fields that extend beyond your body. These fields carry information. And the information they carry is about your identity state, not your conscious self-concept. Not the story you tell yourself about who you are. The deep pattern of who I am that your system has settled into. The baseline frequency that emerges when you're not actively managing your state or trying to be someone. Your subconscious uses this frequency signature as the primary filter. Before you even have a conscious thought about what you want, before you set an intention or visualize an outcome, your nervous system is already broadcasting a signal. And that signal says, I'm a person who experiences reality like this. The quantum field responds to that signal. The possibilities that come into your observation space are pre-selected to match the frequency you're broadcasting. This is why affirmations and visualizations so often fail. You're trying to change the observation at the conscious level, but the filter is operating at the autonomic level. You can think I am wealthy 1,000 times. You can visualize abundance. You can feel grateful for money you don't have yet. But if your nervous system is broadcasting the frequency signature of I am someone who struggles with money, the field will only present you with reality states that match that deeper signal. The conscious, intention, and the autonomic broadcast are two different things. And the field doesn't respond to intention. It responds to frequency. Now here's the real issue. Your frequency signature isn't determined by what you want or even what you consciously believe. It's determined by your identity state, the felt sense of who you are that lives in your body, not your mind. This identity state was formed through accumulated experience and observation, through years of collapsing into specific reality patterns. And it generates an autonomic pattern that operates below conscious awareness. When you're alone and not actively managing your state, there's a default feeling tone that emerges, a baseline way of being. That's your frequency signature expressing itself. You might be able to shift into desired states temporarily, excitement, confidence, abundance, but there's always this sense of returning to a familiar baseline. That baseline is the signature your nervous system generates from your core identity state. And here's where this gets really interesting. Watch this mechanism closely. Your current reality is both the result of your frequency signature and the reinforcement mechanism that maintains it. You broadcast a signature. The field responds by presenting reality states that match. You observe those realities. And observing them confirms to your subconscious, yes, this is who we are, which reinforces the signature, which filters for more of the same reality. It's a closed loop, observer and observed, locked in a coherent state. This is why changing your circumstances doesn't change your core experience. You can manipulate external variables all day long, but if your frequency signature remains constant, the field will continue presenting reality configurations that match that signature. Different details, same pattern. Different faces, same dynamic. Think about your own life right now. Are there patterns that repeat across completely different contexts and relationships? Certain circumstances that consistently trigger the same somatic response, regardless of how much conscious reframing you do. That's not psychological conditioning. That's your frequency signature generating consistent field responses. You might notice that your body seems to know something your mind is trying to override. You tell yourself a new story, but your nervous system doesn't buy it. There's a tension between what you're consciously trying to believe and what your system is broadcasting. That tension is the gap between conscious intention and autonomic signature. Some of you can put on desired emotions or states. You can generate the feeling of confidence or abundance when you focus on it. But it requires effort. It requires maintenance. And the moment you stop actively generating it, you slide back to the default. That's because you're trying to override the signature from the conscious level. But the signature is being generated at the autonomic level. Let me be clear about what this means. You can't think your way to a new frequency signature. Thought happens downstream of the signal. The signature is being generated by your identity state at the nervous system level. It's autonomic. It's automatic. It's the electromagnetic expression of who your system has learned you are. If you want access to different realities, you don't need new beliefs. You don't need to clear old trauma. You don't need to accumulate evidence or build confidence. You need a new identity state that generates a different frequency signature. And that identity state needs to be recognized by your subconscious as self, so the system can stabilize in the new pattern. But here's the question everyone gets stuck on. How do you change an identity state that was formed through years of observation and experience? How do you update the recognition protocol when you don't have access to different experiences? How do you generate a new frequency signature when your current signature keeps filtering for realities that reinforce it? The answer requires understanding something counterintuitive about how identity actually works. Something that changes everything once you see it, because identity isn't what you think it is. It's not psychological, it's not biographical, and it doesn't change through time or effort or accumulation. It's quantum. And quantum systems don't evolve, they collapse. You think identity is psychological, a story you tell about who you are. But identity is actually a coherent state in the quantum field. It's the specific pattern of waveform collapse that your observer function has stabilized into. And unlike psychological stories, coherent states can be directly shifted. Let me show you what identity actually is at the quantum level. Identity isn't what you think about yourself. It's not your beliefs, your history, your personality traits. Identity is the standing wave pattern your consciousness holds in the field. It's a specific configuration of collapsed and uncollapsed potentials that defines your observer position. Think of it as the shape your consciousness takes in the quantum field, the pattern it holds, the frequency it resonates at. When physicists talk about quantum coherence, they're describing a state where multiple possibilities maintain a relationship to each other, where the waveform hasn't fully collapsed. Your identity is the coherence pattern you're holding. It's the specific way your consciousness is organized in the field. And that organization determines which realities you can collapse into observation. Here's what this means practically. The you experiencing this moment is one specific collapsed state out of infinite potential existing in superposition. Right now, in the quantum field, there are versions of you living every possible reality, every decision path, every identity configuration. They all exist simultaneously as potential. Your subconscious has learned to collapse into this particular configuration because it's familiar. It's the pattern that's been repeatedly reinforced through observation. But here's what changes everything. Coherent states aren't fixed. They're not permanent. They're dynamic patterns that can be disrupted and reformed. A standing wave looks stable, but it's actually a pattern of continuous oscillation, maintaining a consistent shape. Your identity is the same. It looks like a fixed thing. This is who I am. But it's actually a pattern your consciousness is actively holding. And patterns can shift. Now here's the misconception that keeps people stuck. They think you need to build evidence or have the experience first to change your identity. You need to act your way into the new identity. You need to accumulate proof that you're capable. You need to gradually become the person who would have that reality. But quantum coherence doesn't work like that. Coherence doesn't require evidence. It requires decisiveness. When you collapse a waveform through observation, you're not choosing based on past data. You're not evaluating probability or accumulating evidence. You're introducing a specific organizing principle that forces one configuration to emerge from superposition. The collapse is instantaneous. It's discontinuous. One moment the waveform exists in all possible states. The next moment, one state is actual and the others are potential. Identity works the same way. You don't gradually become a different person. You collapse into a different configuration of self that already exists in the field. Not through accumulation, through collapse, through decisive observation from a new position. The correction is this: you change identity by introducing a new organizing principle at the observer level. a different focal point around which your coherence pattern can reorganize. You're not building a new self. You're not becoming someone you're not. You're collapsing into a different configuration of self that already exists as potential, a different standing wave pattern. And once that pattern stabilizes, once your consciousness settles into the new coherent state, your nervous system will generate a new frequency signature automatically. The signature is an output of the identity state. It's not something you manipulate directly. When your observer function stabilizes in a new pattern, the electromagnetic signal changes to match. It has to. The signature is just the field expression of the coherence pattern you're holding. Your subconscious then begins recognizing this new pattern as self and filtering for reality states that correspond. Not because you convinced it, not because you provided evidence, because the coherence pattern it's detecting has changed. The recognition protocol updates. To match the new pattern, let me give you some markers so you can recognize how this actually works in experience. You've had moments where you suddenly saw yourself completely differently. Not through reasoning or gradual change, but through a sudden shift in perspective. Maybe someone said something that clicked. Maybe you had a realization that reorganized how you understood yourself. In that moment, you weren't the same person you were a moment before. That was a coherence shift. Brief, maybe temporary, but real. Or you've noticed that sometimes a single decision or realization changes how you move through reality, even though nothing external changed. You made a choice about who you are, and suddenly circumstances that used to bother you didn't matter. Opportunities you couldn't see before became obvious. You didn't accumulate new skills or build new evidence. Your coherence pattern shifted, and your observation space changed with it. Some of you can sense that the you who would naturally have your desired reality already exists somehow. Not as a future version you need to become, but as a present configuration you can't quite figure out how to access. That's accurate. That version exists right now in superposition. The question isn't how to become that. The question is how to collapse into that pattern and stabilize there. You might have also experienced moments of such clarity about who you are that your usual concerns temporarily disappeared. Not because you solved them, because from that clarity they weren't relevant. The problems existed for the old coherence pattern. The new pattern didn't generate those problems. That's what happens when identity shifts. The reality structure reorganizes around the new pattern. Here's the insight. Identity change doesn't happen through time, effort, or evidence accumulation. It happens through discontinuous collapse. A quantum shift where you stop identifying with one coherence pattern and begin stabilizing in another. This isn't psychological work. It's not therapy. It's not self-improvement. It's observer position work. You're not changing your story about who you are. You're not healing old wounds or building new capacities. You're changing which version of you is doing the observing. You're shifting the coherence pattern. And when that pattern shifts, everything downstream shifts with it. The frequency signature, the subconscious recognition protocol, the reality states available to your observation. So now we get to the practical question. How do you actually induce a coherence shift? How do you move your observer position from one identity state to another when your entire reality structure is currently reinforcing the old pattern? When your circumstances, your relationships, your nervous system, your subconscious recognition, all of it is organized around the current coherence state. The protocol is simpler than you'd expect, but it requires understanding one final piece about how observation actually works. And once you see this, you'll understand why everything you've been doing hasn't worked and what to do instead. You don't change your identity by working on yourself. You change it by observing from a different position in the field. The protocol isn't about becoming someone new. It's about collapsing into a configuration that already exists as potential and observing from there until your subconscious updates its recognition pattern. Here's the protocol. I'm going to break this into mechanism so you understand what you're actually doing and why. Step 1. Identify the target coherence state. Don't ask, what do I want to have? That's the wrong question. Ask what identity state naturally observes that reality. The person living your intended reality isn't a future version of you. They're a specific coherence pattern existing right now in superposition. Your job is to identify the felt sense of that observer position, not the circumstances they experience, not the emotions they feel, the baseline identity state, the of course quality of who they are that makes that reality logical from their observation point. When you imagine the person who naturally has what you want, what's the fundamental assumption they hold about themselves? What's the organizing principle of their identity? For some of you, it's I'm someone who creates value effortlessly. For others, it's I'm someone reality responds to. For others, it's I'm someone who belongs in spaces of abundance. Whatever it is, it's not an affirmation. It's the identity state from which that reality is the natural logical result. Step 2, locate the decision point. There's always a moment where two coherence patterns diverge. Whether you living your current reality and the you living your intended reality made different fundamental observations about self. Find that point. It usually isn't about the external circumstance. It's about identity. Am I the type of person who, followed by whatever organizing principle defines each path? The current you observed one answer. The target coherence state observed a different one. Maybe it was, am I someone who can trust reality to support me? Maybe it was, am I someone capable of holding that level of success? Maybe it was, am I someone who gets to have that? The specific question will be unique to your situation, but there's always a decision point where the coherence patterns split. Step 3. Collapse into the new observation. This is where most people get it wrong. This isn't affirmation. This isn't visualization. This is decisive observation from a new position. You observe the decision point and you collapse into the alternate answer, not as something you're trying on, not as something you're working toward, as a recognition of what's already true from that observer position. You're not becoming someone who would have that reality. You're observing as someone who already does from their frame of reference. This is a quantum collapse, not a gradual shift. It's decisive. It's immediate. You stop identifying with one coherence pattern and you observe from the other. The key here, and this is critical, this has to be done from coherence, not from wanting. If you're trying to shift identity in order to get a different reality, you're still observing from the old position, the one where you don't have it, the one where you're reaching for something outside yourself. That's not a coherence shift. That's the old pattern trying to use a new technique. The shift happens when you observe from the position where the question, how do I get there, doesn't make sense. Because you're already there in terms of identity state. The external reality hasn't manifested yet, but the observer position has collapsed into the configuration where that reality is natural. Step 4. Sustain observation until recognition updates. Your subconscious needs time to update its recognition protocol. It's been recognizing the old pattern as self for years. It's going to take consistent observation from the new position before it recognizes the new pattern as self. Continue observing from the new position, not by forcing yourself to stay positive, not by maintaining a feeling, by naturally operating from the assumed identity state in your internal dialogue, in your decision-making, in what you pay attention to and what you ignore. When a circumstance arises, you respond from the new observer position, not by asking, what would the new me do? But by observing as the new pattern and letting the response be natural. You'll know the recognition has updated when the old reality state starts feeling foreign. When the concerns and problems that used to consume you suddenly seem irrelevant or strange. When the new baseline feeling state emerges without effort. That's your subconscious saying, okay, I recognize this pattern as self now. Step 5, allow the field to reorganize. Once your subconscious recognizes the new identity signature, it will filter for corresponding reality states. The external circumstances will reorganize to match, not because you're making it happen, Because the field collapses into configurations that match your observer position. That's what fields do. They respond to the observer. Don't micromanage this process. Don't try to force reality to change through action or manipulation. Your job is to maintain observation from the shifted identity state. The field's job is to collapse into matching configurations. Trust the mechanism. Now let me tell you what this actually looks like in practice, because the description sounds more complicated than the experience. You're not walking around pretending to be someone else. You're not affirming or visualizing or doing techniques. You're simply observing reality from a different identity position. The one where your intended reality is the natural, logical result of who you are, not who you're trying to become, who you're observing as right now. When a thought arises from the old pattern, you notice it. But you don't engage with it from the old observer position. You observe it from the new one, where that thought doesn't have the same weight or relevance. The circumstances you observe begin to shift, not because you're manifesting, but because your observer position has changed and different regions of the quantum field are now available to your observation. You'll notice the old problems suddenly seem irrelevant or nonsensical from your new observation point. Not because you solved them, because from the new coherence pattern, they don't generate. They were problems for the old pattern. The new pattern doesn't interface with reality in a way that produces those problems. You'll catch yourself making different micro-decisions automatically without having to remind yourself. What you choose to eat, how you respond to people, what you pay attention to. These aren't conscious choices. They're natural outputs of the new observer position. What used to feel like your real self will start to feel like a role you were playing. A coherence pattern you were holding that you mistook for your essential nature. The new pattern will start to feel more real, more natural, more you than the old one ever did. Circumstances will begin reorganizing in ways you couldn't have consciously planned. Opportunities will appear. People will respond to you differently. Situations will resolve, not because you made them happen, because the field is collapsing into configurations that match your new observer position, and there will be a quality of course, rather than effort or reaching. Of course this is happening. Of course reality looks like this. Of course I have access to these possibilities, not as affirmation, as natural observation from the new coherent state. Here's the core understanding that makes all of this work. Your subconscious filter isn't blocking your intended reality because it doesn't believe you can have it. It's filtering that reality out because the observer trying to access it isn't recognized as self. The person you've been, the coherence pattern you've been holding, doesn't match the frequency coordinates of the reality you want. Change the observer position. Update the identity coherence state. Let your subconscious recognize the new pattern. The filter automatically adjusts to include the reality coordinates you want. You're not blocked from your intended reality. You're observing from the wrong position in the field. Shift the observer. The reality follows. That's the mechanism. That's the protocol. Everything else is just noise.